Assassin's Creed. The name of this franchise can strike joy, disappointment, excitement, or disinterest, and for me, it's a mix of all. It's a struggle to find such a storied franchise with such high highs and low lows, all done within the span of 14 years. Whether you once loved this series, never did, or still do, if you've been around games, you've heard its name and know the reputation it brings. It's gone through an identity crisis, trading its core genre of action-adventure stealth to a heavy focus on being a huge open-world RPG, changing up its core mechanics from stealth, combat, traversal, but none of this is as strange as the change in direction, as for years the gaming community would wait with bated breath to see where the series would be exploring next. A character in white robes and a hood, perched high up, clearly identifying the place and time period we would be visiting next. Renaissance Italy, Revolutionary America, and the age of piracy in the Caribbean, because these were places worth exploring. And core to the setting was the assassin fantasy, running along rooftops, climbing towers, and hiding within a bustling crowd. We all knew what to expect. This wasn't until Syndicate, where Ubisoft had decided this wasn't enough anymore. We were still an assassin, sure, but it wasn't the focus. 1800s London gangster, now that's a gimmick. But nothing could save Syndicate from its fate. Consumers' trust is a valuable thing. Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed had broken this, and learned a valuable lesson from 2014's Unity. A year's break, a genre change, and winding the clock back near 2 millennia. Assassin's Creed had a fresh face. But it's not an assassin. Ancient Egyptian warrior, followed by Greek mercenary with the focus of these games. It's been over 5 years, but it still doesn't feel real to me to see an Assassin's Creed game without an assassin on the cover, in the marketing, or even able to play as one. Why did a franchise with its core selling point, playing as an assassin, do away with something so unique to its identity? For exploring Valhalla's path of a Viking settling England, it's Ubisoft's latest experience in historical tourism. A monumental task, as for years since the relaunch of this series with Origins, the fans have been split. The traditionalists, who fell in love with the original series' small hub-based cities, playing as an assassin, the master of parkour and a blade in the crowd, fighting a never-ending war of ideologies that would always link back to the present. And then there's the new fans, the ones who enjoyed the increased freedom, the huge seamless open world, spanning entire countries to create the ultimate fantasy of this time period, to be immersed within for hundreds of hours. Valhalla seemed to be treading somewhere between this line. Most of the marketing had followed the trends of the recent games, not much assassins present, and a heavy emphasis on Vikings in England, while having the narrative director Di McDevitt talk about weaving the assassins and elements from the original games into the narrative, describing it as a culmination of the series' 13 titles. It is upon this Valhalla walks a near impossible task, to master both what old fans love of the series as well as new ones, all while carving its own unique place in the franchise and the gaming landscape itself. To see how they did, what better way than to start at the beginning? Well, where to begin in an Assassin's Creed game? A traumatic event that happens at a young age that not only shapes who the protagonist is, but also their view on the world, and sets forward a journey which will extend throughout the entirety of the game. Well, in that case, Valhalla is no different. We pick up with our main character Eivor, still only as a child, attending a Viking feast. Eivor helps their father Varin secure an alliance between Eivor's family and Stjarbjorn's, their king. This is cut short to witness a stunning cutscene, beautifully choreographed and shot, in which Eivor witnesses both their mother and father die, an unhonourable sacrifice, murdered by Kjotve, stopping them from going to Valhalla. While Sigurd rescues Eivor, they are quickly taken off their horse, leading to Eivor getting in a confrontation with a pack of wolves, one biting Eivor's neck badly, but Eivor survives with a scar to earn them the name Wolf-Kissed. This is both metaphorically important to the story later, but also as a practical reason. Due to the player being able to pick whether you want to view Eivor as a male or female, instead of other characters referring to them as he or she, names such as Eivor or Wolf-Kissed are used instead. This is when we get this choice. While it was pioneered in Odyssey, Valhalla gives us a reasonable explanation that is explored through the end of the game, but also gives us an option that is in fact canon. We return to Eivor, 18 years later, in 872, much older, but bound and bloody, with Kjotve, the murderer of their parents, standing over them. Eivor has clearly been on a quest for revenge, like so many Assassin's Creed protagonists in the past. This is our path. This is our motivation. Eivor isn't about to be beaten and done with. Eivor makes a daring escape, killing the guards, and Eivor is now off to rescue their crew and find Kjotve. But first, we need to synchronize. If there's any aspect of Assassin's Creed that I will never not feel magic for, it is this. Perched high up, surveying a beautiful historical environment below. But what was even greater was immediately attempting a leap of faith and being utterly unsuccessful. In Origins, we learned that the leap of faith was a technique passed through Bayek's family. Never being able to teach his own son Kemul, this was eventually passed on to the students of the Hidden Ones. So it's only right Eivor shouldn't know how to perform the leap of faith until shown the technique by a member of the Hidden Ones. Following through with this just shows the commitment that this team and this game has to the previous games and stories of the series. The start of the game being in Norway is perfect, experiencing Eivor running through the pale and cold snow to be contrasted by the rays of warm orange setting sun piercing through. I was immediately transported to this other world, this other time, watching this warm glow transition to the glistening aurora borealis in the night sky. If anything, Ubisoft are known for their gorgeous open worlds, and from just experiencing Norway, Valhalla could be one of the best. But who is Eivor? I'm about to spend over 130 hours with this person. I want to know more about this character. We first learn Eivor is a warrior. They are fierce, driven, and stubborn. About all you'd expect of a Viking. Eivor has their own longship and a crew, and fights for the Raven clan. But there's tension underneath this. Eivor hasn't recovered from their father's death. Not only are they deeply ashamed of how he died, a coward by Norse standards, but their quest for revenge has upset the king Styrbjorn, who seeks peace. Eivor has put this in jeopardy, and isn't sorry about it. Eivor, while being on a quest for revenge, has true ambition of a Norse. Wisdom, glory, and power. But what we really know comes from the reintroduction of Sigurd. Sigurd has similar ambitions, taking this out by travelling and raiding faraway lands. A quest for wisdom, glory, and power. Eivor and Sigurd consider each other siblings, as Eivor was adopted into his family after the demise of their parents. A bond and understanding is deeply shared with both of them. Sigurd introduces two new, very familiar looking figures to fans of the franchise. Assassins, or as they're known here, Hidden Ones, as assassins don't exist yet. Basim and Hytham, hailing from Constantinople, have come to Norway with Sigurd for seemingly obscure purposes. Sigurd gives Eivor a hidden blade. Hytham is surprised by this and almost tries to stop him, but Basim intervenes. Clearly, this was approved by him. Basim is not interested in the Hidden One's creed or traditions. Basim wants Eivor and Sigurd's trust. For that, he desires above all. After deciding to wear it in the open instead of in the shadows, a tutorial in using the hidden blade, very reminiscent of Black Flag, occurs. This game can often lean on nostalgia, and at least for me, considering I never thought having a hidden blade would be missing from an Assassin's Creed game, but this just has me giddy. It's a bit rushed and feels a bit forced, but it completely works for me. Sigurd has strong ambition, and has grown tired of his father's eagerness for peace, while Kjotve does what he pleases. With Eivor, the Hidden Ones, and an emerging ally in King Harold, he organises a raid on Kjotve. The opening Norway section acts as somewhat of a tutorial, and like many gamers, I don't really love a tutorial. Once I've got the basics, let me free into this adventure, and if I need to know more, the game should tell me. This section can easily be completed and moved on to the main course of England within 4 hours. But oh, not me. I had to spend another 10 here. I couldn't think of a more perfect place to get to know the base mechanics in combat, traversal, and stealth, as well as set up Eivor as a character, the world and characters around them. The depictions of Norse culture through the introduction of Orlog, fighting, drinking, and exploration of the icy tundra, I had to lap up everything this part of the world had to offer, and I'm glad I did. But Sigurd's waiting, and so is Kjotve, ready for the Raven clan's arrival. He emerges first to fight Eivor, and after battling him, a shock, as Hytham jumps from above, attempting to assassinate him, in a perfect homage to the original Assassin's Creed trailer. Though this is a pretty spectacular fail by Hytham, instead just injuring himself, leaving Eivor to finish Kjotve off. Upon plunging the hidden blade into Kjotve's neck, the grand return of confession rooms, an iconic Assassin's Creed feature, being able to communicate and send off the enemy. But this is a different one. It isn't Kjotve to appear first, but a hooded figure, Odin, followed by Kjotve. This is Odin's manifestation in Eivor's mind. With Kjotve dead, this revenge plot is thought to be over, but quick to take Kjotve's place is his son Gorm, keen to defend the fort against the Raven clan. This leads to the first of a very well marketed feature of this game, a raid. This consists of Eivor opening up different gates and sections for the army to fight further into the fort. The first major set piece of this game, and it's quite well done. The need for Eivor to open the gates gives player agency and a more linear path through the mission, all while feeling that Viking raid as the warriors push forward. This results in the fort being taken by the Raven clan while Gorm escapes. Returning to meet up with King Harold and Stjarborn, it is announced that Stjarborn will be giving his kingdom to Harold in return for the men he gave to help with Kjotve's raid. Sigurd is betrayed by this, his father giving away his birthright, and makes a plan to take the Raven clan and sail to England to forge their own kingdom overseas. Everything in Norway, everything Eivor and Sigurd have done, all the Viking politics, was leading to this. The Raven clan packs up and sets sail, their eyes on glory, power, a new home, and most importantly, England.
Vinland or Valhalla!
And with that title drop, where this journey truly begins is in England. But before that, it's an animus. This is the present. It's Layla. But this isn't the brash, rushing into danger, the vibrant Layla from Origins and Odyssey. No, this is much darker. This Layla is a different look. She stares at the staff of Hermes, a weapon she used to kill her friend in Odyssey. It's just chilling. The modern day with Layla at the helm was expected, but what we got was so much more. And more important than Layla, we learn of the world. An Aurora Borealis in North America? Desmond's sacrifice in 2012 may have saved the world, but it also has doomed it. Is that Sean? Surely not. Yes, Sean is back, and Eivor's grave is here. Oh my god, Rebecca too. Maybe it's nostalgia, but this not only intrigues me but excites me. They haven't brought back Sean and Rebecca for years, and so far it doesn't just seem like fan service. This modern day completely threw me off my feet, directly and immediately giving consequences to previous games. In Odyssey, they felt like there was just no weight to the action of Layla killing Victoria. And in the first couple of minutes in this game, we see how much this action has affected Layla, showing her true character development. Valhalla also brings back key characters we haven't seen in ages. And on top of that, there's the laptop. Computer systems and hidden storytelling with messages has been a staple in Assassin's Creed for years, but here it's some of the best. From Layla's family emailing her worried about her and COVID, to audio messages from Desmond talking about Ezio and his belief in the hypocrisy of the Creed, giving even greater context to previous games in the series. This modern day section immediately felt so different from the previous games. So much since 3 has felt like filler, and even previous ones with Layla in Origins and Odyssey felt so disconnected from the rest of the series. It's astonishing how in one section it beautifully merges the older games with the new ones, on top with a sense of urgency and mystery about the story waiting to unfold. But before going back into the Animus, why are we here? Why Eivor?
That message led us here, to this place, to a Norse grave in North America. So those bones out there are the only lead we have. Our only chance at fixing this planet before it's too late.
Here it is.
I lived, I died, and now I sleep. And in my sleep I dream. And in my dreams, I see an end to the doom that will grip the earth once again. Find the wolf-kissed. Find the mad one. Find me. And save us all from another death.
There she is, England, our new home.
And how else do we enter England? Sailing up a river, destroying a blockade, and of course, a fight of Vikings versus Saxons, a staple of the hours to come. A fight for the Ragnar sons' encampment ensues, and after a swift victory, we're home. The settlement, Ravensthorpe. A new home for the Raven clan, starting anew. We have a longhouse, yes, that's quite convenient, but other than that, just a lot of tents. A village needs supplies, and how does a Norse in England get those? A raid, of course. The settlement is an important feature within the culture of the game. The Vikings are famous for their raids, brutality, and ship navigation, but something so commonly overlooked is that of their settling in places. A lot of their main reason for their travel to other countries was to settle those lands, and England is important for this most of all. It feels right that the main purpose of Eivor's journey throughout the game is to strengthen the settlement with resources, people, and alliances. Valhalla quickly introduces both main roles of the settlement. A home that can be upgraded and therefore gives you upgrades in return. The option Ubisoft picked to display this system is that of Gunnar and his forge. You can get materials from raids that can build him a proper blacksmith's forge, and from there you can upgrade your gear with him, such as weapons and armor. There are many other options that open up later too. A tattooist to customize your hair, beard and tattoos, a cartographer with different maps depending on what the player wants to find within England, and many more upgrades, both tactical and cosmetic. Raids are how these upgrades are achieved. Raids work by going in with your crew to a monastery and pillaging the chests there. They usually either need a companion NPC to open, or at least open a door to where the chest can be accessed. Once these chests are looted, the raw material is taken and the raid is complete. England is split up into smaller regions or shires, and each one having a recommended power level. So if you wanted to, say at level 20, go into Hummington Shire, which is a level 340 power level, to raid a monastery there would be insanely difficult. I found myself that whenever I was open to a new region, I'd sail into it with my crew along the river and raid whatever monasteries were along it. A lot of the marketing around Valhalla was that of the Viking fantasy, and I felt it the most during this. Getting in your longship, sailing down into new regions previously covered, seeing a monastery on the shoreline and going in with your crew. This was the Viking fantasy Ubisoft had sold us. One of the largest criticisms of Valhalla is how it truly doesn't commit to that Viking fantasy though. As in raids and throughout the entire game, Valhalla takes a leaf of the older Assassin's Creed games and doesn't let you kill civilians. And while the ruthlessness of the Vikings is a staple to their perception, it doesn't fit Eivor as a character to be murdering innocent people, nor this series as a whole. I find the raid system to overall be quite one note. It's exciting at the start, but other than cosmetically, all raids generally just feel the same. Running in with the crew does get increasingly tiresome after hours of time in this game, and the rewards vary slowly upgrading aspects of the settlement, which after a few crucial ones doesn't feel nearly as rewarding. It's a system which starts off great, but the excitement of it peters out quite quickly, leaving a very hollow and repetitive gameplay scenario by the end of it. I find the settlement to be much better in theory than execution. There just doesn't feel like enough here. The initial upgrades, the blacksmith, the fisherman's hut, the Hidemon's bureau, all feel rewarding at first, but after a few of them, there's not really much that changes. A lot of them are cosmetic, and then you're just building houses, which only improves a temporary stat buff after a feast. Ravensthorpe is a town, a village, a community, and what's most important to a community? The people. The people is where this place shines. Whether it's kids wanting to save a wolf, Sven the tattooist dying, and Tove his apprentice taking his place, or helping Petra find her brother, the best part of this settlement is its people, and these small quests and interaction give me a brief glimpse into the purpose of it all. The reason Eivor is here, the reason they fight, the reason they travel England in search of these alliances. Eivor cares about this settlement, about these people, but why should I? Why should you? The settlement should be Eivor's main motivation for their journeys across England. The issue is, they're never there. There's only a few people that can be interacted with outside of upgrading items or changing appearances. Valhalla never gives you a reason to learn these people's names or feel connected to them. There are short instances where they allow Eivor and a person in Ravensthorpe to bond. Petra, Tove, and Tarvin come to mind, but that's only due to optional quests or interactions that happen. So many people in Ravensthorpe feel completely unimportant to Eivor and their journey, and thus feel unimportant to you, the player. AC games are largely defined by the era and place that they're in. The Golden Age of Piracy, French Revolution, Victorian London, these all immediately invoke images born in us from interpretations in many different mediums. Shows we've watched, films we've adored, books we've immersed ourselves in. The depictions of Vikings is one of the most sensationalized depictions of a historical period. During this time, England was under siege by the Great Heathen Army. Eivor, Sigurd and the Raven clan arrived to England during this period, able to meet many of the famous people from this era, Halfdan, Ivan, Ubba, and most notably, King Alfred. While Valhalla doesn't take a lot from specific events of history, it paints a picture of a very sensationalized life in England at the time. This is done mainly through the spread of Norse culture throughout the Four Kingdoms. Northumbria is heavily Norse and Dane dominated, with a lot of influence of culture amongst the Saxons. Mercia and East Anglia have a much more complicated approach. These two kingdoms are large centres of conflict between both sides, while Wessex is very much dominated by Anglo-Saxons. But travelling England is another thing. These are diverse regions, dripping with atmosphere, from the foggy swamps of Grantbridgeshire, the snowy and rigid Northumbria, the floral and coastal Wessex, the forests of Lincolnshire, or the steep mountains of Scarptshire. There's a lot of variety in this England. Each area has a distinct and new way to explore, with thatch and wooden huts to huge Viking halls and ruins abandoned long ago by the Romans. England has atmosphere, visuals and character to be immersed within the historical period. Let's talk about the story and how arcs are structured. Valhalla is structured intentionally to represent the Icelandic sagas. These Icelandic sagas were narratives based on historical events that took place in the early settlement of Iceland by the north. They focus heavily on family history and tell stories about struggles and conflicts of those societies. This is directly tied to the alliance map in the settlement when speaking to Randvi. These sagas come in the form of arcs, and arcs are largely independent, but involve some interweaving of stories around a particular region. Regions are level based, and therefore there is certainly an order recommended to follow. The first two regions to open are great examples of how connected or separate these arcs can be. Grantbridgeshire and Leicestershire both open to you when you first reach England. They both start at level 20, and Grantbridgeshire tells a largely independent story, that of Soma and the Viking versus Saxon fight for control of the region. Arc really only has a follow-up if and when you do the epilogue. Leicestershire is the opposite of this. While there are lots of independent stories like that of Soma spread throughout England, the main story is that called the Prophecy storyline. The main core of this storyline is Sigurd, his journey and Eivor's relationship with him. Leicestershire starts off this storyline a bit slowly. It's still about Norse and Dane versus Saxon and the fight to put essentially a puppet king on the throne of Mercia, meeting characters such as Eivor, Ceolbert and Ubba, which play an important role in later arcs, but very much is the strong settlement and alliance nature of the story. But since Sigurd plays an important part, it's crucial to later in the Prophecy storyline. While arcs have a power level, you can still go and complete them even if you're severely underleveled, as long as the previous arc requirements have been achieved. This is a huge difference to how Assassin's Creed had previously been structured, although it does play off that structure a little bit. From the first Assassin's Creed to Syndicate, the series used numbered sequences, which would separate the game very linearly, only moving to the next one if the previous one had been completed. These sequences often involved the assassination of a target or the liberation of an area of a city. Valhalla arcs, in a way, feel like a spiritual successor to this, as they are still region and or target based. I feel overall this hurts the game though, and mainly through pacing. A lot of these stories deeply immersive for the time period, dealing with the politics of the era. Norse and Dane versus Saxon in much of Mercia and East Anglia. In Northumbria, where there is far larger Northman presence, its stories are about fighting the Picts or future Scotsmen, as well as stories about Viking succession. In Wessex, where it is still very much in the control of Saxons and King Alfred's, there are simple battles and wars fought with previous alliances or other stories to help local rulers. Many of these after a time can feel quite similar to each other. With many of the characters in a particular arc being one and done, you learn after a while not to get too attached, as the most you'll see many of them again is during a battle later which requires all of, if not most of your alliances. While it feels very rewarding to see characters who spend a couple of hours with helping return the favour, many of them just show up optionally, say a few words too, and then leave. It feels a bit static, as well as there's some huge differences in writing quality between many of the arcs. The marketing for this game was focused a lot on making the ultimate Viking fantasy, and quite honestly, I'm shocked that no other studio has attempted to make this kind of game previous to Assassin's Creed. One of the core aspects of the Viking success in conquering and raiding much of Europe and England is that of their naval navigation and ships. Valhalla represents this Viking fantasy and reality through its ship mechanics, where gone are the days of arrow fire or cannon fire. Your ship is core to travelling England. It's the fastest way to travel areas with lots of rivers and to go into new regions. Travelling as Eivor with your crew allows you to immerse yourself, both within this Norse culture, having them sing songs or tell stories, drawing you ever deeper into this fantasy, but also into Eivor's journey, as many of the crew members you can choose come from arcs and stories you experience as Eivor throughout the game. Having characters such as Finnr from East Anglia or Rollo from Essex made the whole game feel much more connected, being able to witness the events that brought Eivor and them together. When not using the rivers, the English countryside relies on horses, which work very similar to the previous two entries. The main difference here is that horses are upgradable. Once the stables are open in the settlement, horses can be trained to learn different traits they don't start out with, such as swimming. I like the idea of this feature a lot. Building up different horses, having different strengths and weaknesses, being able to name them and making a real connection to them, such as in Red Dead Redemption 2. But it doesn't work like that here at all. I bought one skill, then came back after an arc and had enough to buy all the rest, so there was just really no sense of progression. As well as this, any skill trained is immediately given to all horses Ava obtains, leaving no real difference except for cosmetic. Other aspect to the horse riding is that they slow down around dense areas, way worse than Origins and Odyssey, and I swear it's faster to run up hills than ride them as they absolutely crawl up. Also with auto travel, it doesn't actually work a lot of the time. I find it too unreliable to actually take you to a destination you need, and thus never trust it. One interesting thing they did is that they added a stamina bar to your horse, so that running along the countryside of England isn't indefinite. You need to stop and rest your horse or rely on roads, which don't deplete your stamina. The use of the Raven is significantly less than the previous game's eagles, Senu and Icarus. Sinan is only useful in certain missions to find a general area, or when looking for things such as a cave entrance. It feels like this mechanic is on its last legs, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't return with how little importance Sinan received. It's been 5 years, but it still shocks me that parkour, perhaps the best selling point of the original Assassin's Creed game, is barely present, and at the worst it's been. A lot of parkour's shortcomings come from the city designs. These cities aren't designed for parkour. There's certain areas in London, Jorvik and Winchester that work better than others, but they are severely limited. The assassin running across the rooftops to quickly move through the environment is still missing from the series. Valhalla also suffers from Origins and Odyssey use of climbing instead of parkour, where nearly every surface and cliff is climbable by reaching into seemingly invisible cracks, making it feel more like Spider-Man, climbing up and sticking to literally anything, rather than careful playing and positioning to scale up a building or cliff. It feels like this climbing system runs on autopilot, taking out emergent gameplay that comes from a proper parkour system, giving less control to the player to make their own successes and mistakes. The gameplay system I miss the most from Assassin's Creed is parkour, and it disappoints me endlessly to see it such a shell of what was the best and most iconic gameplay feature of the series. With the Viking fantasy a key focus for the developers, to nail this game, perhaps nothing is more important than the combat. Berserkers are perhaps the most extreme example of the Vikings' fighting style, fighting in a trance-like fury, seemingly scared of nothing and death least of all. Valhalla tries to emulate a much more brutal and precise form of combat than previous entries, using hitbox-based combat rather than animation-paired combat. The key to this combat loop of Valhalla is the stamina bar. Certain actions such as a heavy attack deplete this stamina bar, meaning a rotation of these attacks are used to either break an enemy's guard or deal a chunk of damage, which then need to be combined with light attacks. Also key to this is that of dodging and blocking. Dodging will run down the stamina bar, while blocking and parrying will not. Valhalla gives cues when to move to perform each move. An enemy attack with a red rune showing must be dodged, they cannot be blocked, while an orange cue can be blocked and likely parried, opening up the enemy for a devastating barrage of attacks. This system works well enough, although it's a bit basic. And there being only a few enemy variety, with pretty simple AI, leave the necessity for more. And luckily there is. One is through the use of abilities. These can be gained throughout the world or earned from Hytham, that allow an attack that will almost always break a defense and or deal a significant amount of damage. On top of this, within the skill tree there are skills that can be used in combat that, while not only fun to use, completely change my rhythm of combat when playing. Take the skill that allows you to pick up a fallen enemy weapon and throw it at the closest enemy. Once in fights, I would use that as an opening move to the next person I was going to take down. It broke their defenses and lowered their health without depleting any of my stamina, making it when fighting in groups I could be much more aggressive. Not only was it useful, but through 140 hours I never got over seeing Eivor pick up a sword and lob it directly at someone. This intrinsic motivation is key to a lot of Valhalla's combat options, not only with abilities and skills, but also weapon selection. Valhalla devs boasted about dual wielding, and that the system was so free you could dual wield 2 shields if the player wished to. Well, they certainly delivered on that, as any weapon in the game can be dual wielded. Even the larger two-handed weapons, once you upgrade the skill, holding a large two-handed sword in one hand and a large two-handed axe in the other is a powerful feeling. 2 huge casts of steel lugged on Eivor is enough to intimidate even the bravest of NPCs. Weapon selection is crucial to how you want to play. I like being fast. I've always gravitated towards speed over a lot of other aspects, and Valhalla provided an opportunity to engage within this desire, through its use of one-handed axes and knife options within the game. I felt not only did dual-wielding 2 one-handed axes help with my need for symmetry, it provided the perfect balance between damage and speed I was looking for. It was also deeply integrated within my role-playing of the game. I used Varen's axe, Eivor's father's axe, throughout the entirety of the game, due to Eivor's connection with the weapon. It just felt wrong not to. For all the weapon choices though, there's spears, axes, two-handed swords, flails, shields, but the game does not include the both iconic Saxon and Viking weapon of the one-handed sword for the player to use. Other characters, particularly Anglo-Saxon soldiers, have them in droves, but there is not one for Eivor to use. Valhalla incorporates the visceral brutality of this violence through an animation system that happens when finishing an enemy. Eivor will pull a move, such as picking up the enemy sword and plunging it right through them. This is in response to the rest of the combat system feeling quite floaty and spammy. And while this initially achieves its effect of the gruesome killings, it happens after every single kill. By a certain point, I was sick of seeing the same animation, and it's significantly slowing down the combat loop when facing multiple enemies. I worked out a trick too, in the last blow, right as the animation begins, to then dodge, which would make the soldier fall to the ground and Eivor free to attack the next soldier. It made combat noticeably shorter and more enjoyable. Valhalla incorporates progression into 2 main areas. One is through the very traditional completing quests and side activities resulting in XP. This XP is then spent on skills on a skill tree. This skill tree though is needlessly complicated. There are 3 distinct paths: the way of the raven, which focuses on stealth, the way of the bear, which focuses on combat, and the way of the wolf, which focuses on range attacks. The skill tree in this game is represented as a constellation chart, needing to pick up skills which have minor stat upgrades, such as 1.7 stealth damage, in order to create a path to get an actual new skill that can be used by the player in the game. There are a few issues with this system though. Firstly, is that if you wanted to focus on stealth, you still have to spend skills on combat and range within that tree, making sure that you at least somewhat have a rounded experience throughout the game. This often defeats the purpose of focusing on a single branch and upgrading your Eivor to the desired direction. And secondly, skills are hidden until you unlock the group they are a part of, meaning you can't actually plan out any of your builds. A skill you may have gone for much earlier may not even appear unless you unlock a group of skills next to it with nothing but sheer luck. I feel this skill tree system hurts you in the long run and makes the role playing a tiresome tirade. Progression is also tied to travelling the world and exploring through wealth.
I hold here a list. 9 names adorn it. 9 men who need to die.
Our settlement has a Hidden Ones Bureau. And who's there? Hytham. He tasks us with finding and eliminating the Order of Ancients. We've found some, Kjotve from Norway, Ruud from East Anglia, but Hytham has new information, an old Roman city in ruins, which that order has its claws deep within, a task familiar to all traditional Assassin's Creed players. Nostalgia is a powerful drug, reminding us of a simpler time, a simpler us, when life wasn't so complicated, and Assassin's Creed was still a pioneer in the industry. Assassin's Creed 1 is a heavily criticised and heavily flawed game, but while the rest of the series tried to chase the high of Assassin's Creed 2 and the rest of the Ezio trilogy, Assassin's Creed 1 and the legacy it created has been almost forgotten. Not here though. In 3 cities, each has 3 targets to be taken out. This is the mission, and this is Eivor's mission too, as there are 3 major cities all within the clutches of the Order of Ancients, stopping Eivor from making alliances. Eivor arrives, the city of London before them. Eivor wants an alliance with Sto and Urke, who have had the care of London after the previous leader was murdered by the Order. Eivor's orders from Hytham and a quest for alliances merges here. Everyone needs these people gone. But we have to discover who the Order in this city are, and we do. We find an insane doctor, the trainer of soldiers, and a commander of a fleet of ships. That sounds familiar, and it should. London is a direct homage to Arke from the first Assassin's Creed, having 3 targets fill 3 similar roles, a beautiful and direct homage to the foundation of this franchise. But that isn't all of the wonderful Assassin's Creed legacy London in particular has to offer. For the first time in years, I never thought I could get nostalgic for a tailing mission, but it happened, trailing the rooftops, keeping the cursor above my target in sight. I was taken back. It's 2011. I'd just gotten my Xbox and I was playing through Assassin's Creed 1 through to Revelations as fast as I could. But that isn't all. There, Eivor is on a stage, standing behind their target, listening to them hail at the crowd, when suddenly it dawns on you what to do. A stage assassination, tying in directly to that original cinematic trailer for the first game. Our next urban location is Yok, or Jorvik, a Viking stronghold with the puppet of a king. But all isn't well here. The Order too have their grips in this city. Jorvik, like London before, it pays direct homage to another Assassin's Creed city, Damascus. A corrupt political figure, a religious scholar who plays in Burning the Written Word, and a man who poisons a vial, attempting to take out an entire party's guest list. These are the Order members both these cities share. Winchester's next. This time Jerusalem is all we're imitating. We have a member who recruits people to their cause, an executioner, and a high-ranking political official who fakes their own funeral as a trap. All three of these cities craft an assassin experience. And while the cities don't have the parkour-able abilities of previous games, they would be perfect to experience the new revised social stealth. I say would be, as everything about this stealth system should absolutely work and make it one of the best in the series. The trouble is, it just doesn't really work. The first Assassin's Creed began with the introduction of high profile and low profile. High profile was used for combat, running and parkour, while low profile was used for sneaking around and blending with crowds. Unity, we finally saw the introduction of a crouch button, making stealth significantly more purposeful and less situational. Valhalla goes above this. Not only have the crouch feature, but actively using the feature of the hood for when Eivor wants to blend in with the environment. Eivor also has a range of abilities to perform social stealth with. Like a callback to the first Assassin's Creed, Eivor can blend with monks wearing black robes similar enough to Eivor's. Sitting on a bench to hide also returns, as well as a wealth of new options. Performing tasks and jobs, making Eivor more inconspicuous, and even being able to lure drunks to create a distraction for soldiers. These are all remarkable additions and returns to stealth for the franchise, but is thrown off by one very simple issue. The rate of detection is ridiculously unforgiving. There is barely any time between when a guard suspects you and straight out running to attack you. It's a one shot and you're done. In enemy environments such as a camp, this is worse as there are hardly any tools or abilities to help with stealth in these sections. Outside of Hidden Blade, stealth is completely reliant on the bow, and an ability that lets Eivor throw an axe after an assassination, but that almost always ends in detection anyway. The best course to stealth is to take out an enemy camp or fortress, is to just shoot everyone with a bow, and even then, if just one person gets a tiny glimpse at you, the axes are pulled out and it's back to combat. Stealth has always been fun in Assassin's Creed, going through unseen areas, using a hidden blade with a combination of other tools, blow darts, smoke grenades, throwing knives, and using the environment to assist. Stealth has never been particularly complex in the series, but it's always been competent and truly immerses the player in the assassin fantasy. Part of this, particularly, was due to that stealth eliminating enemies was in a lot of cases far more rewarding compared to the risk. Taking down guards and not getting into combat was preferred in earlier games, as it was generally faster and more efficient. In Valhalla, it is so rarely works that you're going to end up in combat anyway. You may as well just run in axe blazing from the start. Valhalla lacks a clear and concise detection meter, as an orange notification barely hovers above enemies before immediately going to red. No clear chase mechanic, needing to run away and use stealth for enemies to leave you alone, and no clear line of sight mechanic. In a game about the Viking conquest of England, you wouldn't really expect to go many other places. Norway, makes sense. Scotland and Ireland, I could see that. Anywhere in mainland Europe or the Mediterranean, well, that is historically accurate. But what about a journey across the Atlantic to the then undiscovered by Europeans North America? That's a journey. One Eivor takes, but why? Well, Gorm is there, and Eivor isn't about to let almost 7,000 kilometers of ocean stop them. There we arrive, Vinland, the beautiful North American flora and fauna, distinctly different from anything in the old world. A land almost untouched by the century of horrors that are yet to take place. Only almost though, as the Norse have a settlement here, run by Gorm's men. At one of these, Eivor finds him, but first, a familiar voice.
What once was, shall be.
That's Juno, the Ancient One who convinced Desmond to sacrifice himself. Eivor murders Gjorm. The revenge of their parents is finally complete, and Eivor takes what Gorm was holding, an Apple of Eden. But why? Why here? Why this? The answer becomes clear as you enter the cave and see the door to the Grand Temple. Almost 1,000 years later, here is where Desmond will save the world. As Eivor approaches, a beautiful callback to Ezio finding the Piece of Eden in the library of Masyaf Castle. Eivor realizes this isn't for them. Eivor finds the natives and decides to leave the apple in their care. This Eivor, being here, gifting this to them, will eventually set in turn the events of Assassin's Creed 3 for both Connor and Desmond, a beautiful linking of this wide franchise. That's when Assassin's Creed is at its best, directly linking events happening at different time periods, connecting it all in its own unique way. Throughout the world of Valhalla, in many different regions, there is constant side content for any player, shall they be interested to participate. These are marked by different coloured lights in the world, on the compass and on the map. Mysteries are one of these, signalled by a blue glow of light wherever one is, and there's many different types, representing many different parts of the game. The most common one is world events. These are side stories that are unique to every area, little tales within this time period across England for you to experience. Dane and Anglo-Saxon alike, these events can be funny, such as the man with the axe in his head, heartfelt, such as the man who has mistaken you for his daughter, and has a deep conversation telling stories, and many more to experience in between. Both Origins and Odyssey had some similar stories to this done through side quests, where a character would present a problem, usually a fetch quest, in which you, the player, would have to do what they wanted and come back and collect a reward, usually coin and XP, and then just move on. World events are structured differently, as they rely on the player paying attention and working things out based on the interaction and the environment around them. In previous games, you didn't even have to listen to the character the quest was with. The objective text would just tell you what to do, and the map would show you where to go. This made side quests easy to ignore and miss out on the interactive storytelling in these worlds. In Valhalla, you can't miss out, as truly interacting with the people of this world is vital to this experience. There are a range of other mysteries, however, and a significant few are focused around combat. There are fights with legendary animals, as well as older Vikings who want to end their life in a fight and finally attend Valhalla. The highlight of these are the Daughters of Illyrion. There are 3 of them, and each begin by Eivor after being poisoned or drugged, and in this state, they must fight each of the 3 women who are of a much higher power level. These fights involve the mythical elements of Valhalla, and of the Norse culture. These encounters with the Dordians is where the combat shine the most, having to use complete awareness, as it only takes 2 to 3 hits from one of them to end your fight. Memorizing their attack patterns, knowing exactly how to counter what they're going to do. It's truly sad that there are only 3 of these in the entire game. Treasures of Britain are exploration through caves, with very light and very linear parkour involved, but it still almost brought back memories of the seal tombs from Assassin's Creed 2, something in the series has never been anywhere close to topping since. The most important one, however, is the Animus Anomalies. These directly tie into the mythological story and the main story of the game, a platforming puzzle playing as Layla to get a reward very similar to the players that searched every inch of the world in Assassin's Creed 2. A snippet of a video that, when all is done and comes together, deeply explains the reason for this story. Artifacts are collectibles throughout the world. Flying papers are very reminiscent of sea shanties from Black Flag, using a bit of parkour to collect a fragment, giving a cosmetic reward. Others, such as Roman artifacts and cursed symbols, give a tedious reason to explore the worlds of England and Norway. Wealth is directly tied to loot, and is a dramatic change from Origins and Odyssey. In those games, loot was a range of weapons and gear that had different stats that could be upgraded or found naturally within the world. There were lots of repetitive items and some rare ones. In Valhalla, every single piece of gear is unique. Every cloak, bracer, axe, shield, helmet is directly placed where it is and can only be found there. It gives more meaning to each individual item found and doesn't concern with minor stat difference that would be between items in previous games. Having weapons that I found and then would constantly upgrade and never having to get rid of it felt like a deeper connection with the tools itself. As well as having this, an entire set such as Magister, Thor or Mentor actually has a significant upgrade with it and gives a purpose to choose one item from another. Another form of wealth is cargo, which is raw materials that can be used to upgrade the settlement, as well as ingots that can be found throughout the world. These ingots are different based on the power level of each region, and they are crucial in upgrading your gear. The last form of wealth is ability, which come from books of knowledge. Eivor is able to discover these books, which can then help in combat or stealth. All of these side activities do the crucial thing of rewarding players for properly exploring the world. Upgrading and getting better gear, as well as more abilities, are largely done through the player deciding to experience all different aspects this game has to offer, instead of just barreling through the main quests. And for many hours, it did feel rewarding. Until it didn't. A common complaint about Odyssey is that the game was simply too long and padded with so much content. Valhalla is also very guilty of this, just in a different way. Gear being unique and all of the smaller stories being handcrafted definitely improves the repetitive nature over Odyssey and Origin side content. But there also just isn't enough variety in how these things are collected. To collect most of this, it requires looking around an area for a key, blowing up some rocks, pushing some objects around that are in the way. And I had done a bunch of this in previous games and so much in this game. Like most Ubisoft games, this gets very tedious and repetitive after several regions. A vision cast upon us, betrayal of our brother Sigurd, and a wolf started Eivor in their journey with Valka. Assassin's Creed has always played with mythology and history, interpreting ancient legends, myths, and gods into this sci-fi story spanning thousands of years. With this so far trilogy of games set significantly further back in time than previous AC games, I naturally thought this would be the perfect time to explore these myths. Origin's depiction of Egyptian gods was underwhelming at best. Origins had a very grounded approach, which I appreciate, but largely, it just did them as hallucinations in Bayek's mind, which doesn't take nearly enough advantage of all that could have been done with the issue and their connection to the Egyptian gods. Odyssey went for a different approach, directly including Greek myths, legends, gods, and creatures right into the game, but in a way that made little to no sense with the universe it had been established in and failed to properly explain any of it, fundamentally contradicting the lore of Assassin's Creed. Valka arrives in England, and it isn't long before Eivor is keen to find out what their visions mean. A concoction made by Valka, and we're able to slip into Eivor's mind of memory and myth to explore in all its glory Asgard. The Norse religion and gods were hugely important, and thus it had to be properly explored. Eivor wakes up in Asgard, but not as Eivor. Everyone referring to them as Harvey. Harvey is Odin. Experience Asgard through the eyes of Odin. We meet Tyr, who sounds an awful lot like Sigurd, Freya, who sounds an awful lot like Svala, Valka's mother, and Loki, who sounds like Basin. Well, this is all in Eivor's mind, is it not? Our journey through the realm of Asgard persists to discover something very important. Ragnarok is coming to end the world, and Odin is terrified, particularly of Fenrir, a wolf destined to kill them. But one thing stands in the way of slaughtering this beast. He's Loki's son. The Asgard arc picks up in Jotunheim, where more pieces start falling into place. Meeting the frost giants here, they have similar voices. Juno, Minerva, what's going on? The mythical arcs are all in Eivor's mind, but they are a representation of memories. Eivor has the memories of Odin and Isu who lived before they were wiped out. Ragnarok is the great catastrophe that wiped out the Isu the first time and that Desmond stopped the second time. Eivor is representing these memories in their mind through the myths and stories they were told to believe. We're not travelling around mythical Asgard and Jotunheim. The real Isu version's made to look and feel like the mythical ones Eivor would believe. Odin needs mead to save themselves from Ragnarok, but Surtungr, who is Jupiter, will not just let him have it. Working with Minerva to find it, we see Minerva communicating with other realms. She's communicating with the future, and through this we hear the voice of a man still centuries to come. Ezio.
Who are you?
Once obtaining the mead and taking it back to Asgard, Fenrir attacks, and with the help of Tyr, who loses his arm, and Odin, manage to kill him, making Loki furious. They all take a drink of the mead and face the end of the world together. The story the mythical arcs tell is an interesting one, and has huge repercussions at the end of the game, but they don't feel important until that point. Until then, they just feel like side activities, and are a bit of a pain to get through, taking you out of England, the loop you've gotten into, experiencing the region, the politics, the upgrades, the settlement, and tells a completely new story with completely new characters. Or so it would seem. The mythical arcs are hugely important though, and they're a great idea, but they feel so disconnected from the rest of the game while playing them. This is where the animus anomalies clear up the rest of this. Collecting them all, we see a clear memory. When they're all around a table drinking the mead, what actually happening was Odin and the others, such as Freya and Tyr, using Isu technology to keep their consciousness alive in a device that would eventually be known to the Norse as Yggdrasil, the World Tree. This way they would be saved from the end of the world and be able to live thousands of years later through humans.
It is done. Now, to face our end.
There is so much content in this game, so many areas to explore, so many stories to participate in. But there's one that matters above all that. One that has a resounding impact on Eivor, on England, and on the AC world. The main storyline is called the Prophecy storyline, which Ubisoft only told me when I finished it, and that's what the achievement said. This storyline is directly related to Sigurd, and takes place through a couple of arcs. The first being Leicestershire, in which Eivor, Sigurd, secure an alliance with the King of Mercia and the Ragnar sons. Next from here is Oxenfordshire, where Sigurd and Bassam secure an alliance with Gaedric of Oxenfordshire. During this, they meet with a woman named Fulke, who Sigurd and Bassam seem far more interested in her and this sacred stone with runes written upon it. At the end of this, Alfred shows up and tells Fulke she can take Sigurd and do what she pleases with him, leaving Eivor furious at Fulke's betrayal and Bassam heading off to find where they are. The story then picks up in Kent, where Bassam is trying to get Sigurd's location, but needs the help of an ambitious bishop before he knows. This is where Eivor and Bassam get to know each other, and a fireside chat reveals a lot about Bassam. The mythological arcs are also key to this, but can be completed at any time. At the end, they find Fulke, but she gets away, leaving a present for them: Sigurd's severed arm in a box, sending Eivor into a rage and panic. Next up is Sussex, where there is a fortress that Fulke is holding Sigurd. Eivor organises their alliance to come and fight for them, taking the fortress and saving Sigurd. Sigurd has been through a rough time, talking about seeing things, knowing who he truly is, and being furious at Eivor for not coming sooner. Fulke had revealed to Sigurd the memories of Tyr to him. Sigurd, seeing this, believes he is a god. Sigurd asks Eivor to accompany him to Norway. They set off, and after a confrontation with Sigurd's father, they enter an ancient Isu temple. And wow, there it is, the Tree of the World, perfectly representing the ancient myths and legends known for centuries in this sci-fi way that exactly builds upon the lore of this franchise. Once there is clearly a figure of a woman there, and past that on a podium, an orb so similar to the one that Desmond used in Assassin's Creed 3. After Sigurd touches it, Eivor and him are picked up by the machine and are transported to Valhalla, or a representation of it. They begin at a feast, before a never-ending fighting, day after day, always the same, and every day Sigurd loses his arm. He's destined to. Sigurd is in love with the place, while Eivor is not convinced. Seeing their dad there, summoned by Sigurd, it all very quickly became an illusion for Eivor, that this isn't the real Valhalla, in which case Eivor wants to leave. But something is stopping them, a hooded figure that's been talking to them throughout the entire journey, leading Eivor on this Norse journey of glory, Odin. Eivor is a sage. They have the consciousness of Odin within them. Centuries ago, Odin saved his own soul using this machine, and now it's battling with Eivor's body for control and influence over Eivor's mind. It is from this that we can work out these Norse values come from Isu, and were likely far more Isu values than just human. A figurative battle with Eivor's mind takes place, literally, with Eivor fighting Odin, with the only escape being the door with the people he loves, Sigurd, Randvi, and all members of the Raven clan there to help them. But Eivor can't leave, and every time is drawn back to Odin. When Eivor chooses to drop their axe, the only thing Odin can control, escape is finally available. That's when Odin's words come.
Me. Wisdom. Glory. Power. What more do you need?
Eivor's reply is simple, but says absolutely everything about their development.
Everything else.
A brash and battle-hungry Viking, keen for power and glory, through years travelling England helping those in need, securing alliances for the Ravensthorpe, and the true meaning of living, and who Eivor is comes to pass. Eivor, who was once so disgusted at their father's cowardly death, has rejected the very values that inspired that anger. And this is where the game is at its best, exploring the characters through their journeys. The arcs take a very short and sweet approach to this, but the whole and how it influences Eivor is the true payoff for this journey. But with Odin defeated, we're leaving the machine. Eivor wakes up, and who's there? Basim, with a knife to Sigurd's throat. A battle sequence ensues. Fighting an assassin or a hidden one is always unique in Assassin's Creed, as they are usually always more agile and interesting than other enemies. Basim claims the death of his son and betrayal by Eivor is why he's doing this, which Sigurd and Eivor both brush off as madness. They trick Basim into the machine and leave him there with no chance to escape for at least a millennium. Basim's betrayal can feel like it comes out of nowhere, but to truly connect the dots is where it matters. Eivor, Sigurd, Basim, and Svala are all sages, reincarnation of the mind and souls of Isu, long dead and exist within them to varying degrees. In Black Flag, the sage there, Roberts, could tell the difference, but was always able to experience both minds. In this it's more complicated and varied. Eivor is always in control of their actions. Odin is a voice in the background, influencing the direction they take. Sigurd appears the same way, with Sigurd very much in control of Tyr in the background until Fulke opens up Tyr's memories, while Basim may as well just be Loki. Loki having a much stronger control over Basim's mind and body than any previous sage seen. But why does Basim do this? Or why does Loki do this? Basim is in love with Althea, who Layla met in Odyssey, and while seeking revenge on Odin for the death of their son, also seeks to free Althea. Now, the most determined motivation of all, love. Sages have always been an interesting point in the AC lore, but I don't feel like they've ever been truly utilised to their full potential. The entire main story is almost completely focused around Isu from first meeting Fulke and dealing with the Sacred Stone. To Sigurd's ancient memories, it all comes to a climax here, as thousands of years ago, Odin, Tyr, and Loki set up events to happen for Eivor, Sigurd, and Basim to continue this over generations before coming to Layla. Like a flashback to the games of old, Layla exits the Animus, and along with Sean and Rebecca, make their way to the temple in Norway. A staple for many Assassin's Creed games, exploring an Isu temple found from memories in the past. Layla explores the temple, hundreds of years later. The temple is now full of radiation, and Layla needs the Staff of Hermes to protect herself from. Layla is searching for the orb, the only thing that can slow down the effects of Desmond's sacrifice, and hopefully give enough time to save the world. Before she can do that, the machine picks her up and takes her to the Grey. There, she finds a representation of Valhalla, Eivor's representation, and the Weavers of Time in Norse mythology, a tie into how the Isu could read time and potential futures and how the Norse represented that, tying back into the game's main theme of fate. Basim appears before her. He's been here for a while and convinces her of what she must do. She places her hand on the podium and stops it. With this, Basim disappears, but someone else does. A glowing figure and a familiar voice.
Layla. Hello.
Could this be? Surely not. A figure known as the Reader, but with the voice of Desmond Miles, reading all potential futures from a golden, glowing tree. Layla is informed Basim has escaped, and she has dropped the staff, and thus, if she chooses not to leave now, she will die. She chooses the heroic choice, to never return to her body, and stay with Desmond, reading all possible futures for many different timelines, to eventually, hopefully, save the world. As she does this, she becomes a very similar glowing figure. Two glowing figures, one man, one woman, standing under a tree, representing Adam and Eve under the Tree of Life. In Brotherhood, Subject 16 left messages with Desmond to find Eve, a storyline that was dropped and picked up here by the Valhalla team almost a decade later. To bring closure to this story, Desmond is Adam and Layla is Eve. We return to the temple, where Basim is old and ancient looking before picking up the Staff of Hermes and returning to his youth. A time jump, we're back in the cabin with the Animus, Sean, Rebecca, and Bassam. Only this time, he looks like a hipster, man bun and all. He demands a meeting with William Miles, the assassin mentor, and after that, we're playing as him. Playing as Bassam in 2020. It's surreal. Bassam eventually returns to Abel's memories to see what happened after his imprisonment. I generally thought my love for the overarching narrative of modern day between Assassin's Creed was long gone. I would argue that it hasn't been interesting since Assassin's Creed 3, and that hasn't even been good since Brotherhood. A staple of this franchise that had been lost with no one, Ubisoft least of all, willing to commit to it. How wrong I was. The overarching plot can be the absolute best thing about this series when it wants to try. And try Valhalla did. And it partially succeeded too. Over a decade of storytelling culminating in this game, it adds and concludes things from so many different AC games. From Connor's story being directly related to Eivor, Minerva communicating with Ezio, bringing in who Eve is and why Desmond had to find her from Brotherhood, the return and importance of sages. So many potential storylines cast aside that Valhalla picked up, explained and finalized, all before creating an exciting new connections and storylines to go further with this franchise. The game isn't over though. Valhalla is an epilogue, wrapping up the Alliance's story and the Order of Ancients. It starts in Huntingdonshire, where Eivor meet up with their alliances again, ready to fight Alfred, Wessex and the last English kingdom. Guthrum, who earlier had criticised Eivor for being brash and too quick to rush into a fight, now compliments Eivor on being much calmer and critically thinking through the situation much more, showing directly how much Eivor has grown throughout the course of the game. While Eivor isn't an assassin or a hidden one, they help out the Brotherhood throughout the game. Early on, Hytham tasks Eivor with eliminating the Order of Ancients. This appears through a menu system similar to Odyssey's cultist system, but in which one member must be eliminated to find another. This system has a pretty glaring issue though, is that it's so obvious to tell who is cloaked. Take the leader for the Order of Ancients for example, the main guy, the father. You meet this person early in the game, and just by looking at the blackened figure, it's very clearly King Alfred. This happens throughout the game. I was easily able to work out who the Order member for the Lincolnshire story arc was just by looking at this. Why are we tracking this Order? For what purpose? Well, the Order of Ancients believe through the ancient technology that the Isu are gods, and that they have actual evidence of them. They worship these gods, and in this case, some like Gorm seek to bring them to life as he attempts with Juno in Vinland. But that's not all they seek. Each and every single Order member has a confession with Eivor upon their death. Some believe fully, others want wisdom, and others just want power. Oh, and as the Order are powerful, they have their hands in every single corner of England, and quite likely the world, seeking to control and manipulate the masses as society moves towards their ideal. Tracking down the Order of Ancients isn't just a side piece though. Some of the Order are more significant than others, and a lot of them are directly tied into the politics of different areas of England, so of course they keep popping up in Arc storyline. It gets interesting when receiving a letter from a poor fellow soldier of Christ, the name that was a precursor to the Templars in the real world. This person is revealed to be King Alfred, who believes 3 Order members in Winchester are after him. After they, and every other member of the Order except for the father are killed, Eivor is once again contacted by a poor fellow soldier of Christ. It is there, in some lonely corner of Wessex, we see the once great King of Wessex, a bakery apprentice, thank Eivor for taking out his Order. Alfred reveals the Order was something passed down to him by his brother, which he, as a true man of God, detested their belief in the Ancient One. Alfred reveals that all along, he wanted the Order gone, and Eivor had done this work for him. Alfred now had ambition to build a new Order, with the knowledge of the Ancient One's technology, but full belief in God, and to fight for God. Eivor is responsible for Alfred, the poor fellow soldier of Christ, creating the Templar Order, which would fight an ideological conflict with the Assassins for centuries. Here it shows the adaptability of the Order, from the Order of Ancients believing in the technology left behind, and themselves as slaves, to a Christian group mobilizing their belief in God, to eventually Abstergo taking advantage of the new capitalist and global world. While Eivor might never be an assassin, they certainly have earned their place in this story. With how directly the journey connects with the Isu, the modern day story, because Eivor does reject being an assassin, after defeating the Order, Hytham offers Eivor to join, and they state that it doesn't suit them as they like their glory and not to be hidden, which completely contradicts the journey Eivor had gone through the entire game. But other than this, Eivor never believed in the cause. Eivor's loyalty and motivation always came from the people around them, the friends they made through England, the settlement and Ravensthorpe, which they fought so hard for, and Eivor ending the game as Jarl is the perfect situation for them. I started this video talking about how Assassin's Creed had a split identity, and that of the assassins and that of the historical fantasy. I find this split to be the most interesting aspect of this game, and how Valhalla tries to be both, but ultimately fails at that task. Valhalla is a perfectly serviceable historical Viking fantasy. The arc of Eivor learning to become the leader of the Raven clan is fine, and the world of England is very diverse and well designed. The largest criticism objectively for this game overall is that of bloat. Everything in this game feels long, drawn out, and bloated. Each of the arcs are fairly concise, but once they're all put together, it takes an enormous amount of hours to trudge through, especially when the gameplay scenarios are not that diverse and almost all arcs involve helping a local ruler with a problem, external or internal. On top of this, the world is filled with fairly mindless collectibles and wealth and artifact collections. On the other side of that, Valhalla tries to incorporate a strong sense of Assassin's Creed identity into this title, without ever making Eivor an assassin. Eivor never becoming an assassin is honestly a bit ludicrous for a game titled Assassin's Creed. Playing a Batman game where you never play as Batman, a Call of Duty game where you never play as a soldier, or a Hitman game where you never play as a hitman sounds ridiculous. Yet we're the third time around playing an Assassin's Creed game without playing as an assassin. The last game where we did was Syndicate, and I'd even argue we haven't played as a character that genuinely cared about the Creed since Black Flag. Valhalla sets up Eivor for this change, as part of their arc is learning about giving up the Viking and particularly Odin's aspiration of wisdom, glory and power, as well as a significant portion of the game takes place working for Hytham, finding the Hidden Ones bureaus, and taking down the Order of Ancients. It really is key to the gameplay loop and story of Valhalla, yet Eivor is completely disconnected from this, showing little interest in the Hidden Ones, not being able to read anything in the bureaus due to not understanding the language, and having little interest in when Basim suddenly wants to kill them. Odyssey knew exactly what it wanted to be, not Assassin's Creed. The AC elements included in Odyssey were a bare minimum and made next to no sense in the context of the series of the lore. The issue here is in Valhalla really tries to be both, a game that is deeply involved in the lore and world of AC, yet its main character has no interest in that world and the game feels much more concerned with creating a Viking simulation. Valhalla feels like such a disconnected experience. Assassin's Creed Valhalla ends up fighting with its own history as a franchise, leaving a confused, bloated and conflicted product and experience that feels unsure of what it wants to be. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for watching the entire video. As a long-time Assassin's Creed fan, Valhalla was such a confusing experience for me, and working on this critique was a lot of fun. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing, as I have lots more videos about lots of different games and the industry at large in the works. Also, I'd love to know what your feelings of Valhalla were, so let me know in the comments. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.